Stanford University.
Thank you all, and welcome back to the farm that is Stanford. I'm going to start out with a very simple document, something that's ubiquitous, a basic political map of the world. But I'm going to argue that this is a very misleading document. It doesn't show what it purports to show. It purports to show the entire world pretty much divided into theoretically equivalent sovereign states, independent countries, nation states, whatever we want to call them. Those are usually considered synonymous terms. All of which occupy a discrete amount of territory with clearly demarcated boundaries. They join with each other in the United Nations and confer legitimacy on each other through mutual diplomatic recognition, and so on. But it's really vastly more complicated. I'll show you a few places on that map. There's Western Sahara. Here we can see it appearing. It's shown as a country. It's not a country. It's never been a country. More about that later. Here we have the Crimean Peninsula as part of Ukraine. Well, it's no longer part of Ukraine. It's been annexed by Russia, and don't expect it to go back to Ukraine anytime soon, perhaps any time. Or how about Somalia in Eastern Africa? It was a country until 1991. It has not been one since then. It has a provisional government that controls a small amount of its territory. I'll show you some other maps later on. If we focus in more directly, we can see many more problems than that. Let's just take a map of the Middle East. I'm going to move over here so I can see it better. And I've just sort of simplified this with a circle, and there we have the standard model. And I'm going to go through a number of maps and just show you ambiguities or anomalies, things that go against that, our basic view of the world. So first of all, we have non-sovereign territories. Here are the Palestinian territories. They are an ambiguity. What exactly are they? It's recognized as a state by 135 UN members. It's a UN observer, a UNESCO member, but it's not a UN member. It's not a sovereign state. That's just the beginning. How about Kosovo? It's declared itself independent. It's not a member of the UN, and it's recognized as a state by fewer countries than recognize the Palestinian territories. Then we have Israel, which is a UN member, but it's not recognized as a state by 32 UN members. And interestingly, even Armenia and Cyprus are not recognized by everybody. Pakistan doesn't recognize Armenia. Hard to say why. Turkey doesn't recognize Cyprus, and that will become clear in a little while. We have states with barely functional governments. I'll show you a map later on about the country of Bosnia, which is really a pseudo-country. It doesn't really govern itself by any means. Lebanon is a real problem. Yes, there's a country there and it has a government, but everybody knows that the militia called Hezbollah is vastly stronger than the Lebanese army. The country is not supposed to have a militia of one of its political parties that's stronger than the army of that country. It goes against the scheme. We have a lot of countries here that do not control their full territorial extent by any means. So Ukraine obviously has lost Crimea and other territories. Moldova doesn't control all of its territories, nor does Georgia, nor does Azerbaijan, nor does Cyprus, nor does Somalia. It gets even deeper. We have a bunch of states here that have essentially collapsed and no longer have effective central governments, or if they do have effective central governments, they only control a minority of their territory. That's been true in Somalia for some time, much more recently true in Syria and Yemen and Libya, but it is the fact on the ground right now. That's what I want to emphasize, how the world actually is, not how our maps show it or how our diplomats conceive it to be. Here we have a couple of fragile states that have lost territory and rely essentially on foreign militaries to a large degree to stay in power. Afghanistan and certainly Iraq. I'll show you more maps of these countries later on. And then how about below the level of the state? How about places we don't see on that initial map, but yet either act as states or at least have some sort of sovereignty? I'll show you some maps later on of this little sliver of a sort of a criminal state called Transnistria. We've got Russian puppet states here in eastern Ukraine. We have two of them in Georgia. We have an Armenian puppet state. They claim themselves to be independent states, or at least most of these do. There's actually a group of them they're called the Commonwealth of Unrecognized States. They exchange ambassadors to each other, even though nobody else recognizes them. Northern Cyprus, recognized as a country by one other country, Turkey. We have Somaliland, not to be confused with Somalia. I'll show you a map of Somaliland later on. We have the Kurds in northern Iraq and northern Syria. So as I say, some of these have limited international recognition, some don't have any. Iraqi Kurdistan has not declared itself sovereign, but it functions as if it were a sovereign state. And then how about areas of Islamist insurgencies, which do not necessarily declare themselves as states, but function somewhat like it, from Al-Shabaab in Somalia and Boko Haram in Nigeria, Ansar al-Sharia in Libya, al-Nusra and ISIS in Syria and Iraq, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Taliban, obviously. So the deeper we look, the more fractured this map becomes and the more ambiguities we see. We can talk about whether or not Russia and the United Arab Emirates are nation states. They are certainly states, but they are both organized as federations, so that's not necessarily a nation state. Different nationalities comprise them. How about states with active separatist movements? That's just the Wikipedia list, and it's hard to say exactly how active you have to be to qualify, but you can see we're getting most countries now. And then the same thing if we get to disputed boundaries, more often than not. So to summarize, the world geopolitical map is vastly more complicated than that simple map makes it seem. But diplomats generally operate on the basis of that map. They operate sort of as the world as they think it ought to be, in a sense, not how it maybe it is. How does it matter? Well, I would argue it helps explain. It doesn't fully explain, but it helps explain the debacle of Iraq. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean 12 years after the US-led invasion in 2003, the news, if you follow it from Iraq, is grim. Okay, we have a humanitarian situation rapidly deteriorating. Everybody knows about that. How about the fact that about half of Iraq is not under the control of its government? So we have the government here in pink. The Kurds have their own state in the north. And then in this beige color, we have the so-called Islamic State, ISIS or ISIL, or whatever you want to call it, with a vast amount of territory. Obviously a problem. What is really worrying the United States right now, well, among many things, though, is that Iraq is getting increasingly close relations with Iran and now also with Russia and with Syria. Not exactly what the United States had in mind, I don't think, 12 years ago when this started. And the price tag, $2 trillion and going. So this was an incredibly expensive, in terms of money and human personnel, and diplomatic clout, any way you want to look at it. And why did it happen? Well, one thing to look at is the fact that before it happened, those who were planning the invasion of Iraq foresaw something entirely different. They thought it was going to be an easy military victory, and in a sense, the initial military victory was fairly easy, but it wasn't that easy afterwards. But if you look at what was being prognosticated, it's going to take weeks rather than months, 5 days or 5 months, under $50 billion, finance its own reconstruction. Now, of course, these are people who are associated with that effort. Not everybody thought that. But looking back, I certainly didn't find people saying that Iraq was going to fragment, break up, and the government was going to ally itself with Iran and Russia. That was not on anybody's radar screen, as far as I know. Well, I think one of the reasons why these costly errors and fundamental misunderstandings come from certain false assumptions about how the world operates. And the most important of these would be what I'd call the myth of the nation state. And by that I mean, well, what is a nation, what is a state? So a state is a government. If it's a sovereign state, it's an independent country. Now, we obviously have subordinate states like California, but that's not a sovereign state. Or any other state of the United States or Mexico or Brazil, whatever. But a sovereign state is supposed to be the ultimate level of the geopolitical hierarchy, right? Independent, nobody is telling them what to do. But it's also supposed to be a nation. And a nation is not the same as a state. The state is the government, the nation is the people. So a nation state is a state that gets its legitimacy from representing the people, not necessarily democratically, but unlike an empire, right? An empire has subjects, not citizens. It doesn't represent them. They're divided up into a number of different unequal groups. That's how an empire functions. But a state, everybody's supposed to be a citizen of the state. They're all represented supposedly by that government at some level, and the government represents them and vice versa. So the nation is more of a somewhat cultural unit. Ideally, a nation is united by some common features, language maybe, religion, although in practice that doesn't really happen, but people are supposed to have a sense that they belong to that same nation, that they are in it together, that they are sort of citizens in common. And we have this view, and it's taught in schools, it's seen in almanacs and encyclopedias, wherever you look, that all those countries are nation states. They become nation states. We don't have empires anymore. All countries have sort of become nation states and function that way. So Iraq is supposed to be a nation state. So under this model, you could go in and you could have regime change. You could take a bad regime and get a better regime, and Iraq is going to cohere and persist as a nation state, because that's what it is. There's a sense of an Iraqi people who are in that together and consider themselves a common political community. Well, some Iraqis certainly did. I don't want to suggest that no Iraqis viewed themselves as members of this Iraqi nation, but in retrospect, it looks like most of them had, if they thought that way, they had pretty vague affiliation with a sense of Iraq, and many of them had no affiliation with that sense of Iraq at all. And the same goes for Afghanistan, and the same goes with Syria, and the same goes with Libya, and the same goes for an awful lot of countries. You know, if we go on the internet and we ask, is Iraq a nation state? And here's the answer we get, yes. But it's not true. It simply isn't. So here, you know, just to give you the Wikipedia's definition, I've basically been through this before, so I won't go over it again. But the notion is this is the dominant form of state organization, the nation state. Nah, I don't think so. If all states are nation states, also the idea would be that these would have to be synonymous terms. But if you want to be speaking strictly about this, you know, they really aren't. You can call them independent countries. That emphasizes more the geographical extent. You can call them nations. That emphasizes the people and political solidarity. The state emphasizes government. The nation state emphasizes all three. And they're supposed to be, like I said before, these territorially coherent sovereign entities. But, and again, to reiterate, Iraq has never really functioned as a nation state, yet US military planners thought it was. So I'll show you some maps of Iraq and some of these other countries as well. But first, let's go to the heart of the nation state. All right, the nation state is supposedly a political, social, cultural form that emerged in Europe in the 1800s. And that was the age of nationalism in Europe, when empires were weakening and perhaps breaking up, and people wanted self-determination for their, most often for their language communities. And so you get the creation of these nation states. But it's questionable. Is Italy a nation state? Well, I'd say yes, but it's not a perfect nation state. Nor is Spain, and certainly not the United Kingdom. They don't fit the model even here. Why is Italy not a nation state? Well, here's a few things we see. We see a mass rally in Venice that calls for independence from Italy. We have a large group of people. It's about 25% of the people in northern Italy now say, we don't want to have anything to do with the rest of Italy. We want to be the country of Padania. We certainly don't want our taxes to keep going down to Sicily and Calabria. That's a big part of the movement. That's a right-wing movement. Sometimes these movements, as in the case of Catalonia in Spain, that's a left-wing movement. So, well, it was left. Now it's both left and center, I should say. But here in Spain, you've got, we just had an election in Catalonia, and the independence group won. It was a fairly close election, but they certainly did win. And they say, no, Catalonia here, that is a separate nation. It is not part of the nation of Spain. And it's funny, the Spanish government they'll do a little conciliation and tell the Catalans, you can call yourself a nationality, nacionalidad. That's fine. You cannot call yourself a nation, nación. That's a step too far. So it's funny, these little words can mean an awful lot. But you've got millions of people, both in the Basque country here and in Catalonia, saying, no, we're not part of the Spanish nation. We want independence. Not all of them. How about the United Kingdom? Well, that's a very interesting map from the last election. Take a look at Scotland. All but 3 constituencies, one in the southern borders, Edinburgh and the Orkney and Shetland Islands. But with the exception of those, every single part of Scotland voted for the Scottish Nationalist Party, which says Scotland is a separate nation. It should aim for independence. Now, they voted for independence, and that narrowly lost. But after it lost, the Scottish Nationalist Party surged forward, and they want to end this political experiment called the United Kingdom, which has been in existence since 1707. And I'll show you a little diagram of that later on. Let's look at some of these areas more specifically. So like I say, Western Sahara here. That you can see very, very clearly on our maps, on almost all of our maps. Very occasionally you can find a map that doesn't show up, but that's rare. It's almost always there. Here's two views of it. Here's a very common one, a map. I think this is a CIA map. I should have checked that, but it shows Western Sahara. Western Sahara as if it were a country. And here's a map actually showing Morocco as a country, and that's a Moroccan map. And it shows Western Sahara as part of Morocco, which is basically accurate. This was a Spanish colony until 1975 when the Spanish dictator Franco died. A democratic government came in and said, we're going to relinquish our colonial empire. People of what had been the Spanish Sahara wanted independence. Morocco said, forget it. This is a valuable territory. It's full of phosphates and other goodies. They sent their army in, conquered it, and have essentially ruled it ever since. Actually, not entirely, because there is a group called the Polisario, which is a rebel insurgent group that represents the Sahrawi, the 150,000 indigenous people of this area. It's a desert. That doesn't have a whole lot of people. But they claim they should be independent. And they actually control a little bit of territory on the other side of the Moroccan fortified wall. And their government is based in a dismal little refugee camp in Algeria. But they claim to represent this would-be nation of Western Sahara that, like I say, doesn't have the quality of existence. That's the line there. They have a flag. They got a motto. You know, they got an anthem. They got all this stuff. They just don't have a country. And that's what that wall looked like. It's actually a big sand berm that Morocco has built in the dunes here with lots of bunkers and fortifications. You can see it on Google Earth pretty easily. Sometimes this can get US companies in trouble. A few years ago, so a Moroccan subsidiary had to apologize for cutting Western Sahara off of the Happy Meal map. Because if you're going to sell those Happy Meals in Morocco, you better show Western Sahara as part of Morocco, not as some sort of independent country like we do in the United States. This could be an issue in the 2016 election. A minor one, but it could be. Because certainly when Hillary Clinton was secretary, she reaffirmed the US policy, which is that Western Sahara should eventually become part of Morocco officially if Morocco can give it some sort of autonomy. Usually in the United States diplomatic service often has sort of a wishy-washy thing on these things. But there are people, this is a new US News and World Report from earlier this summer, and there are some saying Hillary Clinton is taking blood phosphate money from Morocco. This has to do with money going to the Clinton Foundation. Some has come from Morocco. And I don't want to mean to pick on Hillary Clinton by any means. What I just want to show is these issues, which may seem very obscure to us, they can come and sort of bite back political candidates of any kind because of these issues. How about Somalia? Let's just look at Somalia a little bit more detail. That's the official map. Notice there's a provisional administrative line. Whenever you see a straight compass line like that on a map, you know it was established by European colonial authorities. And that was provisional, never totally agreed upon, separating Ethiopia from Somalia. A funny thing about Somalia is its flag has a star with 5 points. And what that refers to is a hypothesized greater Somalia. A Somalia that would include what used to be Italian Somaliland, and what used to be British Somaliland, what is now part of Ethiopia, what is today part of Kenya, what is today the independent country of Djibouti. Why? Because you find Somali people speaking the Somali language in that whole area. This is one of the biggest ethnic groups in Africa. So you do have one language, one group, and there are some people who say, well, then this should be our nation. We should have a Somali nation that includes not just Somalia, but all these other Somali inhabited territories. Of course, that didn't get to be. Instead, Somalia itself broke apart into constituent territories in 1991. And that's interesting, a crucial year. What happened in 1991? Soviet Union collapse, end of the Cold War. Back in the Cold War days, the US and the USSR had more money to prop up weak African countries that might support one or the other. And Somalia actually bounced back a couple times between being a US ally, well, at least it bounced back once, between being a US and a USSR ally. It was with the USSR, and then when Ethiopia joined with the USSR, then Somalia joined with the United States. I mean, that was typical of the day. But this just shows the situation October 14th of last year. I haven't found one that's a little bit more up to date. But we have the federal government of Somalia in blue, but it's in different colors because it's not really centralized at all. You have a bunch of local warlords and clan leaders, and they pledge some sort of ultimate loyalty to this federal government that doesn't even really control the capital of Mogadishu. Then you have Al-Shabaab, a very hardcore radical Islamist group with territory here, here, and here. You've got some ambiguous territories there. And then you have this fascinating place called Somaliland. That was at one time the British colony. The rest of it was once an Italian colony. After the British and Italians left, they joined together, but not really. It's funny how that colonial impact had a major continuing role. But I don't know if anyone reads The Economist, but in this week's Economist, there's a little article on the other Somalia, Somaliland, a functional part of a dysfunctional country. So Somaliland declares itself independent. It says, we are a fully sovereign, independent state. No way are we ever going to join back with Somalia. You know, we don't want to have anything to do. They're a mess. And we're not. And it is, I mean, there are problems in Somaliland. It's not a perfect state, but actually, it's one of the better run parts of this region of the world. It's a democracy. They've delayed their recent election, but they've held many elections, and they've been pretty fair. Its economy is doing pretty well. They don't get any international aid. And it's funny, there are some economists say that that's actually a funny benefit because the government has to work with the people. They have to collect taxes, which means they have to give services to have a government. And they have an effective, functioning government that's running pretty well. Somalia, from this area, are going back. The article talks about a dentist who's gone back and now has the first modern dentistry clinic in this region. Because again, it's doing pretty well economically. That's just a map of it. It's got, of course, it's got a flag, it's got a seal, and it has a budding tourist industry. So if you really want to impress your friends, you can take your next vacation in Somalia. Well, in Somaliland, not in the rest of it, because you can do it. It's relatively secure. I mean, they have an occasional Islamist sneak in and blow something up, but not very often. It's actually, it's a pretty safe place. How about Iraq? I just would start out with a famous line here, published in 1969, there is no Iraqi nation. Well, I wouldn't say there was no Iraqi nation. Iraq was an independent country for a long time, and there was a sliver of an Iraqi nation. I mean, there was a sense among many of the elites that Iraq was a nation, and it was taught in schools, and many people came to believe it, but it wasn't deeply rooted. It's interesting to see how Iraq became a country, a state. Go back to the Ottoman Empire in 1914. So Turkish-run empire, Istanbul is its capital, ruled all of Turkey, and all of what is today Iraq and Syria and Lebanon and Israel and the Palestinian territories, a big chunk of Saudi Arabia as well. Back when it was a part of the Ottoman Empire, it was divided into different administrative districts. There was no one district for Iraq. There was one for Mosul in the north, Baghdad in the center, Basra in the south. So Iraq, it was a geographical expression, but that's all it was. It didn't have any political unity. During the World War I, when the Ottoman Empire was fighting with Germany against the United States and Britain and France, actually before the US joined, Britain and France made this secret agreement. And I should say, this map is extraordinarily well known throughout all the Middle East because it's seen as this great betrayal of the British because the British were working with Arab rebels. That's what Lawrence of Arabia was doing, right? Fighting against the Ottomans. And they promised the Arabs their own country after the war, but then they made this secret deal with France that Britain would get direct control of what is now the core of Iraq, and France would get Syria, and you'd have this sort of divisions. And this map never came to be, but what did happen was after the war, a few British civil servants, and there were two who were instrumental here. Winston Churchill, who everyone has heard of, but also Gertrude Bell, a fascinating woman who was incredibly powerful as of an architect. They basically sat down and they had made deals with the French and not really with the local people, and they just drew lines on the map. Again, look at Iraq. It's got those compass straight lines. They drew lines, and they figured out that, okay, this is going to be Iraq. It's going to be a British colony. Well, it was actually a League of Nations mandate that eventually would become independent, but they were the ones who created it. And it didn't pay any attention to ethnic groups. So here's a map that shows the basic threefold division of Iraq. It's, if you take language and religion, you get a threefold division. So you have Arabic-speaking Shia Muslims in the south, Arabic-speaking Sunni Muslims in the center and in the west, and Kurdish-speaking, mostly Sunni Muslims in the north. Now, there are also a lot of other groups. There's Turkmens here. Some are Sunni, some are Shia. There's Yazidis. You may have heard of them now, a different religious group. Quite a few Christians in the north, although not nearly as many as there used to be. Used to be a lot of Jews in Baghdad. That ended in the 1950s, and a few other religious minorities. But this sort of threefold division. And making Iraq, they paid no attention to any of these borders, and they just thought, well, it doesn't matter. They can all come together as Iraqis. It doesn't matter what language they speak, what religion they follow. They just have to build up this sense of Iraqi identity. And it didn't work out very well, and certainly it's something that the Kurds never really wanted to have anything to do with. And only about 20% of the population, back when Iraq was unified under Saddam Hussein, and before then the Kurds were marginalized. Well, actually, under Saddam Hussein, they were attacked. They were subjected to poison gas on many occasions because they were the wrong ethnic group speaking the wrong language. Iraq, as it was constituted, was dominated by Sunni Arabs, and Kurds were marginalized. Now, this is kind of interesting because after the first Gulf War in the early 90s, that far northern area effectively became independent because George W.H. Bush imposed a no-fly zone, wouldn't allow the Iraqi Air Force to fly north. And once the Air Force couldn't come out and bomb them, the Kurds were strong enough to establish their own state. They haven't declared themselves independent, but boy, they would like to. They would very quickly if they could get any international support for doing so. So they have an effectively sovereign state, and they have gained territory here. This, again, the map is a little bit old, but they've gained a lot of this territory, especially this stipple territory here, because when ISIS moved in about a year and a half ago, the Iraqi military moved out, and the Kurds moved into many of these areas. Here's what's interesting. We have what are known as supergiant oil field right here that goes right underneath the city of Kirkuk, right there. That was not part of the Kurdish territory until about a year ago, and now it is. So this is sort of the line of what the Kurds would like to have, and that includes some gargantuan oil fields. There's some big oil fields in the south. The central part doesn't have any. So that's something that the Kurds certainly would use to build up their state. But guess what? It gets more complicated because the Kurds are actually divided. And this is just Iraqi Kurdistan here, showing the Kurdish Democratic Party and the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, two Kurdish political parties that actually fought a war in the mid-90s. They patched things up, but they are very suspicious of each other. Guess what? They speak different languages. Kurdish is not a language, it's a language group. Kurmanji in northern Iraq and Turkey, Sorani in a little bit further south in Iraq and Iran. There's a bunch of different languages here. But then finally, the last complexity here is there are Kurdish nationalists who want a macro Kurdistan. They're not satisfied nearly with what they have. Of course, they want the Kurdish territories in Turkey. Terrifies the government of Turkey. Some of them want to go all the way from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf, or as it's usually called, to include lots of territories that aren't even remotely Kurdish. So the complexities deepen. How about the United States? Is that a perfect nation state? Well, we've got over half of U.S. states have declared sovereignty. What does that mean? They call themselves sovereign, but everyone knows they aren't. If you're a sovereign power, nobody is above you. But yet, because of the way the United States evolved, at one time states were almost sovereign, back before we had a strong constitution. You know, before the Civil War, people would say the United States are, not the United States is. The United States was much more plural, and so we developed a stronger central government over time. But states still call themselves sovereign, but everyone knows they aren't. My colleague in the Stanford Political Science Department, Stephen Krasner, actually wrote a book called Sovereignty, Organized Hypocrisy. And I think he's on to something here. American Indian nations call themselves sovereign too. You know, American Indian sovereignty in law, they call themselves nations, of course, but yet, are they? Well, no, not exactly, but it does kind of complicate things a little bit. Or here's another one to say, where is the United States? Well, there's the US proper. Well, there's what I call the global United States. And what this map is showing is not just land territory, but the 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone that every country gets through the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. The United States never ratified it, but we still go with it. So any little territory that the United States has in the Pacific means the United States controls a big area around it. Also, there's another little thing I've noticed marked over here. You got that gray zone. Well, these are 3 independent countries that are in, quote, free association with the United States. Marshall Islands, Federated States of Micronesia, and Palau. They are independent countries, sovereign states in the United Nations, but the US takes care of their defense. And they get to move, residents there can move to the United States whenever they want. And why is that? Well, the United States does have the 750,000 square mile, mostly water, not land, Ronald Reagan ballistic missile defense site in Kwajalein in Marshall Islands. So it is very important for US strategic interests. So actually, if you want to look at the United States, we can sort of diagram it like this. You got the United States proper with its 50 constituent states, but then we got the District of Columbia with incomplete political franchise, no senators. We have sovereign, I put in quotes, American Indian reservations. Then outside of that, we've got commonwealths, ambiguous situation, Puerto Rico and Marianas. Then we got Guam and the US Virgin Islands that are unincorporated, organized territories. And we have unincorporated, unorganized territories, American Samoa and a few others. We have a perpetually leased extraterrestrial jurisdiction, Guantanamo Bay. And then we have states in free association. So even the United States is much more complicated than we might think. How about the United Kingdom? That shows its remnants of its empire, mostly ocean space. And I had a lot of fun making this diagram because it's so, I don't know, deliciously complicated. So you have the United Kingdom, but it's composed of 4 constituent countries. England is a country, Scotland is a country, Wales is a country, Northern Ireland is a country, but they're not independent countries, they're constituent countries. Just like Greenland is a constituent country of the Kingdom of Denmark, and Curacao is a constituent country of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. We've got these oddities. That does not include the crown dependencies, Jersey, Guernsey, the Isle of Man. You know, the term offshore banking, it came from these places because they're under the sovereign umbrella of the United Kingdom, but they're not part of the United Kingdom, which means they have their own banking laws. And so they created these very favorable banking laws. And then other places, countries and dependencies said, real good idea, we'll do the same to get a lot of money. We have our overseas territories, of which there are a number of them, mostly small but inhabited. We have Commonwealth realms that are independent states, but who's their head of state? Queen Elizabeth II, so she's the head of state of Papua New Guinea and Canada and Barbados and these other places. So again, complexity, I guess, is my watchword here. And then finally, I'll get to some of the more serious irregularities. So places like Abkhazia and South Ossetia. All our maps show these as part of the country of Georgia. And that's what the United States government says, and that's what just about everybody says, not entirely. If you go there, you'll find they have claimed themselves to be fully independent countries. What most people say is they're puppet states of Russia. They exist because of Russian power. Russia sent its military there in 2008 to make sure that Georgia didn't go in. And so they sort of function as these Russian republics. Who recognizes them? Well, so Russia recognizes them, no surprise. Venezuela and Nicaragua. Why do you suppose Venezuela and Nicaragua recognize them? To thumb their nose at Uncle Sam, basically, because these have governments that are anti-American, and that works. Oh, notice we have Western Sahara just put in a funny color to show its ambiguity. And then there's another country over here that recognizes them. I don't know, anyone want to take a stab at what that country is? Anyone heard of the great state of Nauru? 15,000 people. When I was a kid, Nauru was one of the richest countries in the world on a per capita basis because it's full of phosphates. But the phosphates are gone, and Nauru is bankrupt and impoverished. 15,000 people, sovereign country. What do they have? They have independence and sovereignty, and they're a member of the UN, and they can bestow recognition. And why would they have bestowed recognition on Abkhazia and South Ossetia? $50 million from Russia. Also, they've gone back and forth between recognizing Taiwan and the People's Republic of China several times. Get them to bid up and give you more money. So here's one of my favorite countries, the Pridnestrovian Moldavian Republic, usually called Transnistria. Our maps call it part of the country of Moldova. Moldova was a Soviet republic. It's now independent. It's the poorest part of Europe. It is dysfunctional. It's highly corrupt. But it does not control that eastern strip. That is another Russian puppet state, if you will, backed up by Russian might. It's declared itself independent. It's part of this Community for Democracy and Rights of Nations, also known as the Federation of Unrecognized States. So it recognizes South Ossetia and Abkhazia, and they recognize it, and they exchange diplomats and the like. This is a pretty accurate depiction, though, a den of crime, hotbed of human rights abuse, and a risk to national security. There's a lot of weapons manufacturing there. It's a real center of human trafficking, sort of sexual slavery, if you will. Cigarette smuggling, drug smuggling, you name it, it's a problem. But they do want you to go there again as a tourist. So here's a tourist information map. And I actually had a student, after my class a couple years ago, he went to Transnistria, and he said it was kind of boring, though, so unfortunate. Is Bosnia and Herzegovina a country? I mentioned it. So this is one of the states that emerged with a breakup of Yugoslavia. Again, that came at the end of the Cold War, 1991. All of our maps show it. It's a member of the United Nations. We see it, but boy, it does not function as a country. Let me just show you sort of the way it's divided. So this country is divided into a republic and a federation. So you got the country, but then you have a Republika Srpska. So this is all on ethnic grounds. So this is for the ethnic Serbs. And I should say all these people here pretty much speak the same language, but they follow different religions. So Serbs, traditionally Eastern Orthodox Christians. And then you have the federation, and the federation combines the Roman Catholic Croatians and the Muslim Bosniaks. Again, all these people pretty much speak the same language. And the Croatians and the Bosniaks don't really like each other very much, so the federation itself hardly even functions as a federation. You got a separate Croatian postal service and a separate Bosniak one. Somebody put something on my blog post. He said, in the rare case when you can find a mixed city, here, you're going to have one cafe for the Muslims, one for the Catholics, one for the Eastern Orthodox, or for the Serbs, the Bosniaks. You're not going to even drink in the same cafes. And over here, you have the Brčko district, which is a neutral, self-governing administrative unit that's part of both of these units. So, and who's the actual head of the government here? The head of the government, the ultimate head, I mean, they have an office of the presidency. You can't have one president. You have to have three. And you have this office of the presidency. But above them, you have the high representative. Who does he represent? He represents basically the European Union. He's an Austrian of Slovenian origin. He's not even from this country. But he's the highest position because Bosnia does not function as a state, despite the fact that it's on our map. How about Belgium? Does Belgium even have a future? Kind of put up a few little comments about it. De Gaulle said it had, I missed that. I'm sorry, I left something out. Had been invented by the British to annoy the French. So that got left out here. Or as one of the political leaders said, Belgium is nothing more than the king, the national football team, and certain brands of beer. Okay, meaning that's what unites it. It went for, almost 200 days without a government, and it didn't really matter because the regions here, Wallonia, French-speaking, Flanders, Flemish or Dutch-speaking, and then Brussels, they matter much more than the government of Belgium does, as does the EU. And it's interesting, we're even seeing maps here where it's disappearing. So here's a map that shows it divided in two, Wallonia and Flanders. Or here's a map where they've given the French-speaking area to France and the Flemish-speaking part to the Netherlands. Unlikely that will happen. I only have 5 more minutes, but I'll have a few other maps here. How about micronations? Are they nation states? Here's Andorra, member of the UN, right? It's a sovereign state. The role of monarch is jointly exercised by 2 co-princes, the Catalan Bishop of Urquell and the President of France. So the President of France is a monarch. That's kind of odd, of Andorra, another country. It's a feudal remnant. A feudal remnant that never got wiped off the map. How about Monaco? It's less than a square mile. Easily fitted on the campus of Stanford University. And one of the problems here is it leads to false comparability. So you go to here's a CIA World Factbook from a few years ago for average life expectancy. And you look, where do people live the longest? Monaco, Macau, which is a part of China, San Marino, Andorra, then finally we get to Japan. You say, oh my gosh, there must be something about these microstates that enables them to really have these healthy populations. I actually talked to a political scientist who said, well, yeah, we should run some regression analyses and try to figure out what it is about what they're doing. Well, if you could take Atherton and make it a country, it would have an even larger. So it doesn't have to do with their policy, it just has to do with how the map is made. And finally, I have plenty of other slides, but obviously don't have time for them, so I'll leave it on this. There's an issue of false comparability because we think then that countries or nation states, whatever we want to call them, are the basic units and they're to be compared with each other. And we do this all the time. But there's something wrong of comparing the country of Tuvalu with its 10,000 people in the Pacific to China with its 1.3 billion. That would be like comparing China to a country of 130 trillion people. That's what the population difference is between them. So anyway, but my final conclusion is, I think it's time for us to sort of drop our illusions about this map and view the world more as it actually is. And I'll tell you, I'd be extraordinarily surprised if Iraq or Syria or Somalia become coherent states within my lifetime. Maybe it will happen. All our foreign policy is premised on the fact that it will happen. You know what? It'd be nice if it would. I don't think it will, and I'd be willing to bet money that it's not going to happen. Although that isn't how it works in academia, is it?
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.